Madeleine was born in 1921, and she was actually born in Switzerland, even though both her parents were American. Born into a complicated family insofar as her mother came from a very wealthy family, New England family, and so she came from a very wealthy family. My grandfather, on the other hand, was a musician, and more or less they ran away with each other. And as is often the case with those sort of marriages, it wasn't a happy marriage at all. She had a full sister, Teenie, who was, I think, maybe 3 or 4 years older than her. My grandmother was incredibly difficult. My grandmother was very spoilt. She came from a very wealthy family. She was very singular. So I don't think either Teenie or my mother had a very easy time growing up. The marriage wasn't happy, and my grandmother and my grandfather split up when my mother was about 14 years old, and I know that had a pretty devastating effect on her. Teenie, very tragically, she died in a car accident, got killed off her bike. My grandmother sort of almost made my mother feel guilty that she was the one who had survived. And she was forever looking for her mother's kind of approbation, and never felt she got it. She never felt her own achievements matched up to her mother's expectations. And my mother had achieved very early success in that, like she rode in her first international show when I think she was 12. It never dawned on her that you had to learn how to do this. It just came completely naturally to her. I think she just had a prodigious talent. My mother was put on a train, the horses were put on a train, she went to Hanover, and she went off to the cavalry school to be coached by this gold medal winning German officer. In Aachen in 1937, the Irish sent a show jumping team to Aachen. I think she definitely was very smitten by these Irish guys. 2 things held her back in that career. One was she became a naturalized Swiss, and the Swiss just wouldn't entertain the idea of having any woman on their team, on their national team. So that was one thing, and then of course the war came. So at an age where she would have really been coming into her own, and then my mum packed it in 1957 when she would have been in her mid-30s. And my father had fought in the First World War as a cavalry officer, and he became the head of that cavalry school. He was the commanding officer of the cavalry school where my mother was being coached by one of the officers there. That was the first time they met. He ended up in Ireland in 1947. My mum at that time was running away from her first husband and decided the place she wanted to run away to was Ireland. That's when they reconnected. I think interestingly, my mum had such a tragic relationship with her own father, and had lost her own father when she was 14 or 15 years old. I think she saw in my dad, she saw a protector, an older man, someone who'd look out for her. And I think they fell in love, and they were extremely happy. He died in 1972. And that, of course, changed everything. And she was deeply miserable at my dad's death. So my mum, I guess, she was really looking for something to kind of occupy her. And one weekend I got a call from my mum saying, I want to show you something. We arrived at Mount Usher. She breaks out the picnic. She has a lovely old tartan rug and the picnic basket. I've seen about 4 signs saying no picnics. And she just casually took out the egg and cucumber sandwiches and said, well, I think in this instance, ownership will allow for an exception to the rules. And that was it. She bought the place. But she was funny because all the stuff we've talked about, you had to drag it out of her. She just couldn't understand how anyone could be interested in her life.